My name is Jack Whitmore. I was 64 years old when I finally accepted a truth that had been standing in front of me for years. A person can spend decades building a home and still discover they were the only one living in it. I grew up believing that family was not something you inherited, it was something you earned. Blood created a connection, but actions created a bond. That was the lesson my father taught me when I was young. He was not a man who spoke much. He did not give long speeches or sit me down for emotional conversations. He showed love differently.
He woke up before sunrise every day. He worked when he was tired. He fixed things before anyone noticed they were broken. And when people asked him why he worked so hard, he always said the same thing. Because the people you love are counting on you. I carried that sentence my entire life. Maybe that was my greatest strength. Maybe it was also my biggest weakness. Because I spent too many years believing that if I kept showing up for someone, eventually they would see me. Eventually they would understand. Eventually they would know I chose them. I lived in a small town outside Omaha, Nebraska. A place where people still knew their neighbors. Where the local diner had the same faces every morning. Where everyone knew who had built their house, who had repaired their truck, who had spent their life working honestly. I was never a wealthy man. I never owned expensive cars. I never took luxury vacations. But I had something I valued more. I had stability. I had a home. I had a wife. And when I married Carol, I thought I was gaining a family. I did not know I was stepping into a place where I would spend years trying to prove I belonged. Carol had a daughter, Emma. She was 14 years old when I first met her. A teenager, old enough to understand everything. Young enough to resent almost everything. I remember the first time Carol introduced us. Emma stood there with her arms crossed, looking at me carefully. Not with anger, not with hatred, just distance. And honestly, I understood. She already had a father, a biological father named Richard. I was not there to replace him. I never wanted that role. I never walked into her life expecting her to forget where she came from. I only wanted to be another person she could trust. Someone who stayed. Someone who showed up. That was all. In those first years, I was careful. I never forced myself into moments that were not mine. I never demanded affection. I never said, "After everything I've done for you, you owe me." Because I believed love that had to be demanded was not love. So I earned my place slowly. I helped with school projects. I drove her to activities when Carol was working. I attended events where other fathers sat proudly beside their children. Sometimes Emma would barely acknowledge me. Sometimes she would introduce me simply as my mom's husband, and I would pretend it did not hurt. I told myself she was young. I told myself these things took time. I told myself that one day she would understand. That day became my hope. And hope can keep a person going for a very long time. When Emma started thinking about college, reality arrived. The numbers were impossible. Tuition, books, housing, transportation. Every year seemed to cost more than the last. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with Carol after Emma went to bed. The bills were spread out in front of us. Carol looked overwhelmed. "I don't know how we're going to manage this," she said quietly. I looked at those papers. Then I looked toward the hallway where Emma's room was. And I already knew what I was going to do. "We'll figure it out." Those were the words that defined my life. We'll figure it out. I took extra work. I delayed things I wanted. I stopped thinking about what I needed. Every paycheck had a destination before it even arrived. But when Emma got accepted into the school she wanted, when I saw the excitement on her face, I felt something I had not felt in years. Purpose. I remember the day she opened the acceptance letter. She cried. Carol cried. And then Emma hugged me. A real hug. Not the polite kind. Not the forced kind. A real one. "Thank you, Jack," she whispered. For words. That was enough to make every sacrifice feel worth it. I carried those words with me. I carried them through every difficult month. Through every bill. Through every time I worked late and came home exhausted. Because I believed those words meant she saw me. I believed she knew. When Emma needed her first car, I helped. She had saved some money, but it was not enough. The dealership needed a cosigner. She looked at me, not Richard, not anyone else, me, and I signed. I still remember standing in that parking lot after she drove away. Carol put her hand on my shoulder. "You really love that girl," she said. I looked at the road where Emma's car had disappeared. "Yes," I told her, and I meant it. I loved her. That was never the problem. The problem was that I loved someone who slowly learned to separate what I gave from who I was. As Emma grew older, the relationship changed. First, I barely noticed. Life gets busy. Young adults move away. They build careers. They build relationships. I understood that. I did not expect daily phone calls. I did not expect constant attention. I only wanted to feel like I mattered. But the calls became different. They were no longer conversations. They became requests. "Jack, can you help me with this? Jack, I'm short on rent this month. Jack, something happened and I need help." Every time I helped, because that was who I was. Because every time she called, a small part of me remembered the girl who hugged me after getting into college. I remembered the girl who said thank you. I was chasing a memory, and I did not realize it. Carol noticed the distance before I admitted it. Sometimes she would tell me, "Emma is just independent now." I would nod. Sometimes she would say, "Don't take everything personally." I would nod again. But there were moments when I wanted Carol to say something else. I wanted her to defend me. I wanted her to tell Emma, "That man has been there for you." But Carol stayed quiet, and silence can hurt more than anger, because anger at least admits something is wrong. Silence tells you that your pain is not important enough to address. Still, I stayed. I kept helping. I kept believing, because I thought family meant standing beside people even when they did not notice you standing there. I never kept a record of the money I spent. I never counted the hours. I never reminded Emma about the sacrifices. I thought a father did those things because he wanted to, not because he expected payment, not because he wanted praise. But respect is different. Respect is not payment. Respect is the foundation. And slowly, without realizing it, I was building a family on a foundation that only I believed existed. The cracks were already there. I just refused to look down. Then came Emma's 30th birthday. A celebration. A beautiful restaurant. A room full of people. Friends. Relatives. Yes, everyone who knew Emma's story. Everyone who would soon hear mine. I arrived that night believing I was walking into a family celebration. I did not know I was walking toward the moment everything I believed would collapse. Because sometimes the truth does not arrive quietly. Sometimes it stands in front of everyone you know, and says your place was never what you thought it was. Emma's 30th birthday was supposed to be a night I remembered with happiness. That is what I told myself when I put on my jacket that evening. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. Not because I cared about looking impressive. I never was that kind of man. I just wanted to look like I belonged. A small thought crossed my mind while I adjusted my collar. She's 30 years old now. 30 years. I had known her for more than half of her life. I had watched her grow from a guarded teenager into a successful woman. I had seen every stage. The awkward years. The difficult years. The moments when she doubted herself. The moments when she needed someone to remind her she was capable. And despite everything, despite the distance that had grown between us, I still felt proud. That was the painful part. Even after everything, I was still proud of her. Carol and I arrived at the restaurant together. It was one of those places Emma had chosen because it was expensive and elegant. The kind of restaurant where people spoke quietly, where the lights were dim, where every detail was designed to make people feel important. The tables were covered with white cloth. The glasses were polished. The walls were decorated with expensive artwork. Everything about that place said success. And I remember thinking that Emma deserved to celebrate. She had worked hard. She had built a life. I wanted to be happy for her. When we walked inside, Emma greeted us with a smile. She hugged Carol immediately. Then she hugged me. A quick hug. The kind people give when they are being polite. But I ignored the feeling in my chest. I told myself not to overthink it. Not tonight. Tonight was about her. Not me. The room slowly filled with people. Friends from work. Old classmates. Relatives. People who had watched Emma grow up. I sat at the table beside Carol and listened to conversations around me. Everyone was talking about memories, childhood stories, family moments, the kind of conversations where people look back and remember who was there. And I waited. I thought maybe someone would mention the years. Maybe someone would say something simple. Jack was always there. Maybe Emma herself would say something. Not because I needed praise. Not because I wanted a thank you speech. I just wanted acknowledgement. A sign that those years meant something. But I waited for something that never came. The dinner continued. People laughed. Stories were shared. Emma stood several times to thank everyone for coming. She spoke about her childhood. She spoke about her struggles. She spoke about the people who supported her. And every time she mentioned her family, she talked about Carol. She talked about Richard, her biological father, the man whose name she carried, the man who had appeared and disappeared throughout her life. I sat there quietly. I did not interrupt. I did not correct her. I did not want to turn her birthday into something ugly, because that was what I had always done. I swallowed things. I carried things. I protected everyone else from uncomfortable truths, even when nobody protected me. As the evening went on, the conversation became more relaxed. People were drinking. People were laughing louder. The kind of atmosphere where people say things they would normally hold back. I noticed Emma becoming more confident, more animated. She was surrounded by people who loved her. And then someone asked about her childhood. I do not even remember who asked. I only remember the smile that appeared on Emma's face. A smile that, at the time, I did not understand. She looked around the table. Then she started talking. My childhood was complicated, she said. Everyone listened. She laughed softly. I had my challenges. But my dad always made sure I had everything. My chest tightened. I looked at Carol. She was smiling. I looked back at Emma. At first, I thought she meant me. For one brief second, I allowed myself that hope. Then she continued. Richard was always the one who gave me everything I needed. There it was. The name. The reminder. The line she had always kept between us. People around the table nodded. Some smiled. Some laughed. I forced myself to smile too, because what else could I do? I was sitting there surrounded by people. I was not going to make a scene. I was not going to ruin her birthday. Then Emma looked in my direction. And that was when everything changed. She smiled. Not kindly. Not warmly. Almost like she was making a joke that everyone already understood. And then there was Jack, she said. The room became quieter. I felt every pair of eyes move toward me. Emma laughed. Jack was always good at one thing. Someone asked, "What's that?" She lifted her glass. Taking care of the bills. People laughed. At first, I thought maybe they misunderstood. Maybe they thought she was making a harmless joke. But then she continued. No, seriously. Jack was basically the person who signed checks. The laughter grew. Not everyone laughed. But enough people did. Enough for me to hear it. Enough for it to stay with me. I sat there frozen. I looked at Carol. My wife. The woman who knew every sacrifice. The woman who knew every late night. The woman who knew every dollar I spent. She was sitting beside me, and she did nothing. She did not tell Emma to stop. She did not say, "That's not fair." She did not defend me. She simply smiled awkwardly and looked down at her plate. That hurt more than Emma's words, because Emma was my stepdaughter. But Carol was my wife. She was supposed to know me. She was supposed to see me. And in that moment, I realized she had been watching me disappear for years. She just never stopped it. The conversation moved on. Someone changed the subject. People continued eating. The restaurant continued moving around me. Servers walked by. Glasses were filled. People laughed. The world kept going. But something inside me had stopped. I listened to the rest of the evening differently. Every word sounded distant. Every laugh sounded louder. I watched Emma celebrate. I watched people praise her. And I finally understood something I had refused to accept. Emma did not forget what I had done. She simply did not value it. There is a difference. Forgetting is an accident. Dismissal is a choice. When the dinner ended, I stood up. I hugged Emma. Yes, I still hugged her. That is the part people might not understand. Even after those words, even after everyone laughed, part of me still loved her. That does not disappear in one moment. But something else disappeared. The illusion. I looked her in the eyes. She smiled. Thanks for coming, Jack. Jack. Not Dad. Not family. Just Jack. I nodded. You're welcome. Those were the only words I could say, because anything more would have broken me in front of everyone. On the drive home, Carol talked. She tried to explain. She was just joking. I kept looking through the windshield. The roads outside Omaha were dark and empty. She didn't mean it like that. I said nothing. Jack, you know how Emma is. Still nothing. Finally, Carol sighed. You're being too sensitive. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was cruel. Because it revealed everything. After 30 years. After everything I had done. After every sacrifice. My pain was the problem. Not what caused it. When we got home, I went straight to my office. I closed the door. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to look honestly at my life. I opened the records, the accounts, the payments, the things I had never thought about because I never expected to need proof. The credit card, the emergency account, the automatic transfers, the insurance payments, the support I had quietly provided because I believed family meant responsibility. I stared at those numbers for a long time, and then I understood. I had spent years proving I was family, but they had spent years proving I was useful. The next morning I made a decision. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, out of clarity. I walked into the bank, and I began removing myself from the life of someone who had publicly told the world I was only a wallet. I did not shout. I did not threaten. I did not demand an apology. I simply stopped being the person who always saved everyone. Because sometimes the loudest decision a person can make is silence. And I was finally ready to see what happened when I stopped carrying a family that had already decided I was not truly part of it. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. I had spent most of the night awake, not crying, not raging, just thinking. There is a certain kind of pain that comes when someone hurts you unexpectedly. It burns. It shocks you. It makes you angry. But there is another kind of pain. The kind that comes when someone finally confirms something you secretly feared for years. That pain is colder. It does not explode. It settles. It becomes a decision. I sat on the edge of my bed while the house was still quiet. Carol was asleep beside me. The same woman who had sat next to me while her daughter turned my years of sacrifice into a joke. I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I wondered how long she had known. How long had she watched me give everything? How long had she watched Emma accept my help but refuse to accept me? I had spent years wondering if Emma understood. But maybe I should have been asking if Carol understood. Because she was there for all of it. She saw the overtime. She saw the bills. She saw me come home exhausted. She saw me skip things I wanted because Emma needed something. She saw everything. And still, she sat there silently while I was humiliated. That realization hurt more than I expected. I got dressed quietly. I made coffee. I walked into my office. And I started looking at everything differently. For years, I had avoided thinking about money when it came to Emma. That sounds strange coming from a man who spent his life working hard. I knew exactly where every dollar went in my own household. I knew what bills needed to be paid. I knew what repairs needed to be made. But when it came to Emma, I never treated it like an expense. I treated it like family. That was why I never questioned it. That was why I never created boundaries. Because deep down, I believed that if I loved someone enough, they would never take advantage of me. I was wrong. I opened my banking information. There were years of automatic payments, years of transfers, years of quiet support, a credit card Emma used for emergencies, an account we had created together because I wanted her to always have a safety net. Insurance payments, rent assistance, small things, large things. 100 invisible ways I had kept her life stable. And as I looked at everything, one thought kept returning. She never saw this as help. She saw it as normal. That was the part that finally broke something inside me. When you help someone once, they are grateful. When you help someone for years, sometimes they stop seeing the help. They start seeing it as an obligation, a responsibility, something they are entitled to. I closed my laptop. Then I opened it again. Because this time I was not going to hesitate. I called the bank. The woman on the phone was polite. She asked what changes I wanted to make. I answered calmly. Remove her access. There was a pause. Are you sure? That question stayed with me. Are you sure? Nobody had asked me that before. Not when I worked extra hours. Not when I signed paperwork. Not when I paid bills. Nobody asked if I was sure when I was giving. But now, when I was protecting myself, suddenly certainty mattered. Yes, I said. I'm sure. One account closed. Then another. One connection removed. Then another. It was not dramatic. There was no shouting. No anger. No revenge. Just a man finally putting an end to something that had gone on too long. After that, I canceled the automatic payments. Her rent support, her emergency transfers, everything. Every line that connected her comfort to my sacrifice disappeared. When I finished, I sat back in my chair. And I expected to feel guilty. I expected regret. But what I felt was something else. Relief. Not happiness. Not satisfaction. Just relief. For the first time in years, I was no longer waiting for someone to appreciate what I had done. I had stopped begging silently for recognition. I had accepted reality. Emma had made her position clear. Now I was accepting mine. I did not tell Carol. Not yet. I wanted to see something. I wanted to know what would happen when I was no longer the person who solved every problem. Because that was the question nobody wanted answered. Was I loved? Or was I needed? There is a painful difference. That difference reveals itself when the support disappears. For the next few weeks, I said nothing. I went to work. I came home. I lived my life. Carol noticed the change. I could tell. She watched me more carefully. She tried small conversations. Normal conversations. As if normal could return after what happened. But something between us had shifted. I was no longer the same man. Before, I always rushed to fix things. If there was a problem, I solved it. If someone needed help, I stepped forward. That was my identity. The dependable one. The reliable one. The man everyone called when life became difficult. But I had finally realized something. Being dependable does not mean being disposable. One evening, Carol finally brought up Emma. She's been busy, she said. I looked up from my dinner. Okay. She waited. I knew she wanted me to ask more. I did not. Finally, she sighed. You're still upset about the birthday. I placed my fork down. I'm not upset about the birthday. She looked confused. Then what? I looked at her. The birthday just showed me something that was already there. She did not answer. Because she knew. She knew exactly what I meant. I continued. I spent years trying to prove I was family. But I never asked myself if the other side was trying too. Carol looked away. That told me everything. A person can avoid the truth with words, but not always with silence. A few days later, the first sign came. Emma called. Not a casual call. Not a "how are you?" problem call. I answered. Hi, Emma. There was a pause. Then her voice changed. Jack. I tried using the card. I already knew. Yes. It didn't work. I leaned back in my chair. I know. Another pause. What do you mean, you know? I looked out the window. The Nebraska sky was gray that morning. Quiet. Empty. I closed it. Her tone changed immediately. What? I closed the account. A long silence followed. Then came the question I had expected. Why would you do that? Not "are you okay?" Not "did I hurt you?" Not "can we talk?" Just why? Why did you stop giving me what I needed? That was the question. I closed my eyes. Emma, do you remember what you said at your birthday? Another pause. Jack, come on. That was a joke. A joke. That word almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. A joke is supposed to make people laugh, not reveal what they truly think. You told everyone your real father was the one who gave you everything, I said. She became quiet. You said I was just the man who signed checks. Jack. No. You said it. My voice stayed calm. That surprised even me. For years, I imagined this conversation. I imagined anger. I imagined shouting. But when the moment came, I had no anger left. Only truth. I believed you. She breathed softly. What does that mean? It means I finally listened. She did not respond. And for the first time, Emma understood that something had changed. The person she assumed would always be there had stepped away. Not because I hated her, because I finally understood that love without respect destroys the person giving it. A few days later, the consequences reached her. Her rent payment failed. The automatic transfer was gone. The safety net was gone. And for the first time in her adult life, Emma had to face a problem without immediately calling me to solve it. She called Richard, the father whose name she had defended, the father she had chosen in front of everyone. She expected him to fix everything. She expected one phone call, one promise, one solution, but she heard something she was not prepared for. He could not help. He did not have the money. He could not carry the responsibility she had spent years assuming someone else would carry. And that was when the truth finally reached her. The man she had called a replacement was the only person who had ever truly stayed. But I was no longer rushing back. Because sometimes the person you lose is not the person who leaves. Sometimes it is the person who finally stops chasing you. I used to believe that the hardest moment in a person's life was losing something. A job, a home, a person they loved. I was wrong. The hardest moment is realizing you spent years protecting something that was never protecting you back. That was where Emma was now. And that was where I had been for a very long time. The difference was that she was just beginning to understand the pain. I had already lived with it. After Emma's call, I did not feel victorious. That is something people misunderstand. They think when someone finally stops allowing themselves to be used, they must feel powerful. They imagine satisfaction. They imagine revenge. But that was not what I felt. I felt tired. Deeply tired. Because the truth is, when you love someone, even someone who hurts you, part of you still hopes they will understand before things fall apart. Part of you still waits for them to say the words you wanted to hear. I was wrong. I didn't appreciate you. You mattered. But those words never came. Not then. Not when it mattered. A week passed. Then another. The house became quieter. Not peaceful. Quiet. There is a difference. Peace feels warm. Silence feels empty. Carol noticed. She noticed because she was no longer living with the man who solved everything. She was living with the man who had finally stopped. One evening, she stood in the kitchen while I was making coffee. Jack. I looked up. Her voice sounded uncertain. Yes. Have you talked to Emma? I knew that question was coming eventually. No. She looked down. She's upset. I almost smiled. Not because I was happy, because I knew exactly what that meant. She was upset. Not hurt. Not ashamed. Not regretful. Upset. Because her access had changed. Because the person she counted on was no longer available. Why is she upset? I asked. Carol looked at me. You know why? No, I said quietly. I really don't. She sighed. Jack. She didn't think you would actually do it. There it was. The sentence that explained everything. She did not think I would actually do it. She did not think I would actually stop. She did not think I would actually choose myself. Because for years I had taught everyone that I never would. Every time I forgave. Every time I paid. Every time I stepped in. I was sending a message. A message that said, you can hurt me. You can ignore me. You can take me for granted. And I will still be here. That was my mistake. Not loving Emma. Not helping her. not supporting her. My mistake was allowing love to exist without boundaries. I looked at Carol. Did you ever tell her what I did for her? She became quiet. That silence was enough. I nodded slowly. I see. Jack, that's not fair. I looked at her. Not fair. She realized what she had said. Her expression changed. But it was too late. Because fairness was something I had been missing for years. I had been expected to understand everyone else. But nobody had tried to understand me. She's your daughter, Carol said. I looked away. No, she's your daughter. The words were painful to say, because for years I had considered Emma my own. But that night at the restaurant, she had reminded me of the difference. She had made sure everyone knew, and now I was finally accepting it. Carol sat down. She didn't mean it. I had heard those words before. She was joking. I had heard those too. She's young. Another excuse. But this time I did not accept them. Carol, how many times can someone tell you who they are before you believe them? She did not answer, because there was no answer. A few days later, Emma called again. This time, her voice was different, less confident, more careful. Jack? Yes. I need to talk to you. I sat down. Okay. There was a pause. Then she said the words I had been waiting for. I'm sorry. For a second, I closed my eyes, because those words had weight. They had the power to heal, but only if they came from the right place. Sorry for what? I asked. She hesitated. For what I said. I waited. And for how it looked. How it looked. Not what she did. Not how she made me feel. How it looked. That difference mattered. Emma? I said quietly. Do you understand why it hurt me? She was silent. I think so. No. My voice was calm. You don't. She did not argue. And that surprised me. I spent years trying to show you that I loved you. I continued. I never asked you to forget your father. I never asked you to call me something you didn't want to call me. But I did hope that after everything, you would understand I was more than a person who paid for things. I know. No, you knew after the money stopped. Silence. That was the truth. Painful truth. The kind nobody wants to hear. I never saw it that way, she whispered. But you lived that way. She had no response. Because actions reveal things words try to hide. You called when you needed help, I said. You accepted everything I offered. But when you had a room full of people watching, you made sure everyone knew Richard was your father and I was just the person who helped financially. Jack, I was trying to be funny. I looked down. That is what hurts the most. What? That you still don't understand. The conversation ended shortly after. Not with anger. Not with shouting. Just exhaustion. Because sometimes people do not lose relationships because of one terrible moment. Sometimes they lose them because one terrible moment reveals years of truth. After that, Emma had to face reality. Her landlord was not interested in family arguments. He was not interested in explanations. He was interested in payment. That was how the world worked. The world does not care who hurt your feelings. It does not care who disappointed you. It asks one question. Can you meet your responsibility? For the first time, Emma had no answer. She had spent years believing there would always be someone standing behind her. Someone who would catch her. Someone who would solve the problem. She never realized that person was not a resource. He was a man who got tired, a man who could be hurt, a man who could walk away. And now she had to face something she had never expected. Richard could not replace me, because he had never done what I did. He had given her his blood.
I had given her my life. And those are not always the same thing. Months earlier, I would have done anything to make Emma understand that. I would have explained. I would have pleaded. I would have tried one more time. But something inside me had changed. I no longer needed her to admit I mattered. I knew I mattered. I just finally understood that I had been trying to prove it to people who had already decided not to see it. And that realization changed everything.